Over the past 15 years, star trades have become more and more common, and the Clippers themselves have found themselves being one of the biggest destinations to trade for star players. Whether it's Kawhi Leonard, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, or a massive trade for Paul George to bring him out of OKC, the Clippers always find themselves in these rumors. And yet again, they found themselves in the rumors to trade for James Harden over the offseason. Now, the rumors have finally come to an end as James Harden was finally traded to the Los Angeles Clippers.
Ladies and gentlemen, the deal apparently is done. Kawhi Leonard has made his decision and he's heading to LA. But it's the Clippers, not the Lakers, who are getting the top NBA free agent. That according to ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski. Now listen to this. To land Leonard, the Clippers also made a deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder for Paul George. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody. Per the report, the Thunder will get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari. OKC also gets 4 unprotected first-round picks, a protected first-rounder, and 2 pick swaps.
Harden lands with the Nets, obviously. The Rockets get a package including Victor Oladipo, 4 first-round picks, and 4 first-round swaps. Indiana gets Karis LeVert, while Cleveland gets Jared Allen and Taurean Prince.
But we have a trade coming in right now from our Adrian Wojnarowski. The Brooklyn Nets are trading James Harden to Philadelphia for the 76ers. Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks.
I guess you could characterize it as a game that James Harden has played many times before.
And won.
While you were sleeping, the massive news from Woj out of the NBA. The Clippers get James Harden from the Sixers in blockbuster trade style involving 7 players. There's 4 draft picks. It's a pick swap. Let me show you what it looks like. Take a moment and just read through the names there. Harden and 2 others going to the Clippers. Philly gets 4 veteran players. They get 2 first-round picks. They get 2 second-round picks. They get a future pick swap as well. And so leave it to Woj to upstage NFL trade deadline day with the biggest trade of the NBA season.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to jump right into things here today. Now, today, we finally see James Harden be traded. How fitting that he gets traded to the Los Angeles Clippers on Halloween. What a scary team they've built over there, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But I do just want to talk quickly. We've been talking about this James Harden trade for months, and I'm just so glad that it's finally over. We can move on with the season. We can look towards some other things, and we can finally see how these teams really build out, especially towards the trade deadline, until we see those, last-second moves to push towards the championship. So I'm just glad that the trade is over. It's 2 weeks into the NBA season, and we can really just lock in and worry about basketball rather than the off-court stuff. So I'm just glad that it's happened. It is kind of crazy to think that James Harden is now on his 4th team since 2021, having played for the Rockets, the Nets, the Sixers, and what will now be the Clippers here in just under 3 years. It's kind of insane when you think of the level of player he is, not only right now, but from a historical standpoint as well. It's kind of insane to see him moved around the league that much. But when we jump into the details, OKC ended up getting involved late with the trade, but Harden is going to the Clippers with PJ Tucker, Philip Petrusev, I don't know if I said that right, and then I believe they got a swap in the trade as well. And then the 76ers got Marcus Morris, Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, Kenyon Martin Jr., 2 second-round picks, and I believe 2 first-round picks and a swap were the final details. I know OKC eventually got involved with the trade, so it got a little bit weird because when you look at what OKC did, now the Sixers obviously got those draft picks, but then OKC was kind of in with like the 2028 and then swapping for 2026, I believe. But yeah, OKC's involvement in the deal made it a little bit weird, and probably why I was hearing that the reports took so long, because I guess initially the trade broke and it took like an hour before the details were finally released. At that point I was asleep, and I'm sure most of you were, because yeah, the trade went down late last night. But yeah, it's very interesting. We finally see the trade go down. It opens up a lot for Tyrese Maxey from a 76ers standpoint, but we're going to talk more about the Sixers here in a second. I want to look at this from the Clippers side of things. Now, really what you're doing here is banking on the big 4. You're going all in. I want to say all 4 of their name players will be free agents this offseason in Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook. So this does become a very, very crucial season. And if you don't, at bare minimum, probably go to the Western Conference Finals or the finals, then you're at least going to lose one of these guys. And it'll be interesting to see how James Harden kind of fits in with these guys who, at this point, have played together. Westbrook was on the team last year. Obviously, PG and Kawhi have been on the team for a long time. Westbrook has played with Paul George and OKC. So these guys have a little bit more chemistry between the three, and it'll be interesting inserting a guy like James Harden into that. Although James Harden has historically inserted himself along other star players fairly well, when we look at how he played in Houston, regardless of who kind of came there, I think the only time where we saw an issue between James Harden and a star player in Houston was when Dwight Howard was there. But when Chris Paul went there, it worked pretty well. When Westbrook went there, it worked pretty well. And so for the most part, he's fit with stars very well throughout his career. You could even say the Nets, because a lot of that was injuries, and even say the Sixers, because the issue there really was Daryl Morey and James Harden. It had nothing to do with, Embiid and Harden's relationship from that standpoint. So I do think that out of guys, when you're looking at guys that are being traded to teams, James Harden is a guy that will fit fairly well alongside other star players. And from a Clippers perspective, you keep Norman Powell for bench scoring. You obviously keep Zubac and Terrence Mann and Mason Plumlee. So this team becomes a pretty deep team. You did give up a lot of depth in those 4 forwards that you traded away, which is interesting because that really becomes a position where maybe you look as a weak spot going into the trade deadline is perimeter wings for this team, because as it goes for perimeter defense, there's not a ton on this roster. When we're talking about perimeter defense on this roster, really it's just going to come down to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard locking up the best players on the other team. But when they're off the court, it's going to become kind of an issue because Norman Powell's undersized at like 6'3". Westbrook obviously can be a good defender on a point guard, but he likes to exert himself more on the offensive end. And obviously plays with 100% on both ends, but it's not like he's a lockdown guy like a Drew Holiday or something like that. Terrence Mann can be a serviceable defender, but he's not like an elite defender by any means. And then you're probably going to have like Bones Highland on the court at times. Mason Plumlee can't switch. He's a very interior defensive center. So it does become a question mark on who's guarding people when Kawhi and Paul George aren't on the floor. Now, I'd expect one of them to be on the floor at all times during the game, especially with the amount of stars you have. You should be able to stagger and have 2 players that can go get you a bucket and have been in situations to lead a team before on their own on the court at all times, which is something that no other team in the league really has the luxury of. The only other team you could look at and maybe say is close would either be the Celtics, but Drew Holiday's never been an offensive leader like that, and neither has Jaylen Brown, because Jaylen Brown's always played with either a Kyrie or a Jason Tatum. And then maybe you could say the Suns, because all 3 of them have been leading scorers on their team, but it's still only 3, not 4. So it is something to kind of note for the Clippers that as it goes for name value, you by far and away have more than the rest of the league. And although I do think you've put yourself in a hole draft pick position wise, you already were in a hole. So it almost kind of makes sense from a Clippers perspective that, look, these guys could leave at the end of the year. We could walk away from the Paul George, Kawhi Leonard era with no winning really to show of it, because they made the conference finals that one year. And they were all injured and it didn't matter, right? So that's all the success you've seen from a team that was, when they were put together, people were saying this team could win 3 titles, right? This team was expected to be at the level of a dynasty, and they have failed to even reach the NBA Finals a single time. So it is interesting to see them put all their eggs in one basket with this team, but it might be the right way to go about things, because we've seen throughout the rest of the league that trying to build for now and for the future has hurt teams and causes setbacks for the future, and also doesn't allow you to reach your fullest potential right now. So shout out to the Clippers. I don't know why they wanted to keep Terrence Mann so bad. Maybe it was because they had to get rid of so many wings money-wise to make the trade happen. But honestly, if I were them, I would have tried to keep those first-round picks and gotten rid of Terrence Mann. But that's probably an exhausted conversation point. Then there's the Sixers. The Sixers bring in a lot of wings. Obviously, if the Clippers have gotten rid of all of their wing defenders, well, the 76ers bring them all in. Now, have those players been especially good on the offensive end so far? Not exactly. When we're looking at those guys, the only 3 of them to have played are Robert Covington, Nicholas Batum, and Kenyon Martin. Morris hasn't even touched the floor at this point throughout the year, which obviously it's only 3 games in, so it's not too big of a sample size. But when we have seen these players play, we saw Kenyon Martin be able to get 5 points on about 60% from the field and 20% from 3. He was also able to grab a steal and a rebound per game. So nothing tremendous stat-wise there. He was playing the least amount of minutes per game at 15. Nicholas Batum was playing about 18 minutes per game and was averaging under 3 points on god-awful efficiency from 3, shooting only 28%. from a guy that you expect to be a very good 3-and-D guy, that's awful efficiency, because Kenyon Martin, I don't expect to shoot it as well from three. He's more of a slasher and a defender, and he's still kind of developing into who he'll be as he's only 23 years old. So that is a good get as a young player to bring into the Sixers there. But then there's Robert Covington, who I guess would be the biggest piece, him or Morris, of the trade, who's averaged 3 points on 25% from three and 50% from the free throw line and 33% from the field. So all these guys have not had very good shooting splits, and Robert Covington is not the defender he was before. He's still getting 2 steals a game and almost a block per game, but Robert Covington was at a level where people were picking him for Defensive Player of the Year a few years ago, and he's just not that anymore. He is 33, Nicholas Batum is 35, and I want to say Morris is 33 or 34 as well. So, 3 of the 4 guys that you brought in are well into their mid-30s and are clearly not the players they were before, because I think Morris clearly has gotten past that, half a season he had with the Knicks where he averaged like 20 points per game and was very helpful to, kind of boost his trade value and get the Knicks a first-round pick back for him when he was traded to the Clippers. But again, I think all 3 of these guys have shown a clear decline over the past few years. Obviously, I think when you think of Batum, you think of, the fact that he was able to come in, and when they were playing the Jazz, they were able to go to such a small ball lineup. The Clippers, in that perspective, they were able to go to such a small ball lineup and kind of play Rudy Gobert off the floor, who was a multiple time Defensive Player of the Year. Again, Batum just isn't shooting it that well right now and clearly has moved past that point of being that level of a player. So it is interesting to see that those are kind of your main pieces that the Sixers get back. But it does attack an area of need is wings, because obviously you have Joel Embid. You're not worried about bringing in any other centers to worry about. You have Tobias Harris at the 4, and then you have Tyrese Maxey. The rest of the roster is kind of up in flux, and I'm sure most of these guys will get minutes on the roster, but it is a little bit weird to see that be all the value that you get for trading such a good player in James Harden, even with the situation around him. Now, with all that said, we do have to look at the biggest winner of this trade, and it isn't the 76ers and it isn't the Clippers, it's Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey is probably going to get a massive extension. So far through 3 games on the season, he's averaging 30 points per game. He's shooting it 50% from the field and 56% from the 3-point line on 8 attempts per game. I cannot emphasize how good of shooting performance that is. That is one of the best shooting performances if that were to extend for a year-long sample size of all time, if not the best shooting sample size of all time. He was such a good spot-up shooter last year, and honestly, personally, I didn't believe that it would be able to translate into truly developing into a star player next to Joel Embid and being able to average 30 points per game. I roughly thought what he did last year was kind of where he was going to peak and level off at and kind of just be that sort of player for the next few years with slight changes to his game, maybe a little bit better playmaking, maybe a little bit worse shooting one year, maybe a little bit better shooting one year. But he has not plateaued. He's done what a lot of people in the media predicted, and he's developed himself into an all-star. At this point, he's probably a lock to win Most Improved Player. He's probably a lock to be an all-star come all-star time. And he has looked so good in the role next to Joel Embid as the secondary star. He's had more points than Embiid in some of the games that they've played so far, and it's really a testament to him and his efforts to develop as a playmaker as well, because he's averaging almost 7 assists per game, and he's kind of a guy that was looked at, prior to the season as an okay playmaker. He can make play when you need it, but not necessarily somebody that you'd want to rely on as your primary perimeter playmaker. And he has completely blown those kind of rumors out of the water so far in this season. And I think that's a big reason why the Sixers were okay accepting a deal that was maybe lesser for James Harden, just to kind of be done with the situation, be done with the drama, get some players that they could potentially help win with now. As again, we talked about, most of the guys they brought in are in their early 30s or mid-30s, and obviously are looking towards winning a championship. There's a reason that they were on the Clippers as role players, taking less money than they could have to play elsewhere. So that is a big thing here for the 76ers, and you potentially keep enough contracts on the team that if some stuff kind of breaks up in some other places, there might be a avenue in which you could go trade for a star player, whether that's like a Chicago Bulls falling apart, or maybe a Memphis Grizzlies falling apart if by the time Ja comes back, they're too far out of the playoff race. So there's a lot of different avenues that could potentially open up. Obviously, more trades will happen throughout the season, and the Sixers have kind of kept themselves still in play to add another star player along the core of Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Tobias Harris. Whether Tobias would be in that trade is kind of a big question because of how important he's been for this team over the past few years. Him this season also doing very well, averaging over almost 20 points per game and over 45% from three at about 3-4 attempts per game as well. So both of them have played very, very well next to last year's MVP in Joel Embid. And this team looks good. This team looks a lot better than I thought they were going to. I honestly had this team regressing towards a 5 or a 6 seed right out of the play-in. I didn't have them falling into the play-in, but a team that probably wasn't going to have home court. They were going to have too much drama going on. I didn't think Tyrese would be able to take the step. I thought Embiid would fall off a little bit from last year's MVP season, and that's been pretty much completely wrong. To this point, they've taken care of the teams that they should beat in the Toronto Raptors, obviously beating them by 7 points, and the Trailblazers beating them by nearly 30 points the other night. The only team they've lost to was their opening night versus the Milwaukee Bucks. It was the first time we saw Damian Lillard and Giannis play together. And so you can't really give too much slack for the Sixers because they put themselves in a situation to win a game in which they were going against Giannis and Dame had almost 40 points in that game. He shot 17 for 17 from the free throw line. And obviously, Kelly Oubre in that game was huge for them, coming up with 27 points on probably one of his best shooting performances of his career, shooting 9 of 11 and 5 from 6 from 3, along with not missing a free throw. And obviously, Tyrese Maxey led them in scoring that game. So there's been a lot of positives for the Sixers to this point to kind of take away with the current roster that they already had, which I think adding some more defenders to the team can never hurt, as obviously we've seen this team at some points, struggle defensively, and then there's some points in which this team looks like one of the best defensive teams in the league, in large part due to having Joel Embiid be their anchor defensively. But I do think, again, bringing in those guys kind of evens out your defense, and you are going to bring in a lot of veterans into the locker room, which hopefully allows you to continue to play good on a night in, night out basis. Again, they have other veterans on this team. You have a guy in like Patrick Beverley or Daniel House who's still on this team. Again, you just brought in Kelly Oubre, who averaged pretty much 20 points per game last season. Anthony Melton is a good guard off the bench. Kirk Maz is a guy that I think we all thought would be better at this point, but he's not even really getting PT for them at this point. So it does help kind of bolster their rotation with the loss of PJ Tucker and James Harden, who both played significant minutes for this team. But I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know if I'd put them in a top tier contending status at this point. I would still like to see if they potentially go make a move for a guy like a Zach LaVine, maybe if he's available for the team or something like that. Honestly, the Bulls are the number one spot that comes to mind for me because of how bad they've been so far. But the 76ers look to be going in the right direction, and honestly, I think, like I said, the biggest winner of this trade isn't either of the teams. It's Tyrese Maxey for now having the ability to go get an absolute bag from this organization and really elevate his game and become a potential name guy himself in this league as a true all-star and a very, very good player. We'll see how that translates to him being the lead guard for this team come playoff time, if he is, and there's no other trades made, and that may hurt them just due to his lack of experience as kind of having to be the second guy on a team that's trying to win a championship. But again, they do bring in enough veterans that maybe there will be enough around Embiid to get it done. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet that the 76ers would be winning the championship this season. But I do think, even though when you look at this in a vacuum, they kind of had an awful trade package come back for James Harden, it could be beneficial and they could still go on to be a very decent and a team that's making runs in the playoffs versus very good teams out east, whether you're looking at like the Celtics or you're looking at the Bucks or even the Miami Heat, who went to the finals last year, or whoever you're looking at, maybe a young team like the Magic. Like, there's going to be a lot of room for the 76ers to make their mark in the Eastern Conference playoffs, and I think that this trade kind of helps you know what you're working with. And from a coaching staff perspective, from a general manager perspective, and just from a player perspective as well, that helps you tremendously night in and night out, because you're not wondering, is James Harden going to show up to the game today? Is James Harden going to show up to practice? Is James Harden going to play today? What's going on with that situation? Am I going to get traded in a James Harden trade? None of that's really on the table anymore. And the same situation kind of goes for the Los Angeles Clippers as well. I wouldn't necessarily put the Clippers as like a favorite to win the championship, even with all the star power that they have, but I would say that they have put themselves in a better situation than they were before. They did get rid of a lot of wing depth, but like I said, those guys weren't necessarily producing for them so far this year, even though they've been very impactful for the team over the past few years. And again, I think it really comes down to, can you beat the Nuggets? Obviously, as a Nuggets fan, I'm going to be biased in that perspective, but the Nuggets kind of set themselves above the rest of the league at this point, and continue to show improvement across their roster, that teams are trying to catch up to them and try to catch up fast, and the Clippers are no exception in that regard, and have put themselves in a situation that, again, this team always finds themselves in the situation of, barring health, they are clearly one of the top 5 best teams, at least on paper, roster-wise, in the entire league. And, maybe come playoff time, we won't see James Harden fall off in playoff minutes because he won't be forced to do so much during the regular season. Maybe we'll see a healthy Paul George and Kawhi. And maybe Westbrook will continue, having changed in his role, because when you look at Westbrook, he's one of the most fascinating players this season for me, because he went from a guy that was obviously a star player. He had struggles with the Lakers last year. We saw him get traded to the Clippers and then pretty much be their lone guy in the playoffs and take games away from the Phoenix Suns, who had Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. He goes, and now this season, he's only averaging 8 shots per game, but he's still averaging nearly a triple-double at 11.7 assists and 7 rebounds. He's bought in defensively. He's a hustle guy. He's still playing minutes, and he's not being detrimental. He's not shooting a ton of threes, but the ones he is shooting, he's making decently. He's shooting 50% right now on about 2 attempts per game. Not a large sample size and not a lot of threes being shot, but that is helpful for this team, because if he's not a non-factor from the three-point line, then somebody has to at least stay closer to him, which opens things up for these other star players, because who do you double on this team? Like, when you're playing them, you can't really help off of anybody other than Zubac. And even then, if you're helping off of the center can just kind of sneak into the paint, and that's an easy layup for a guy that's like 7 foot tall. So this team is very, very interesting and very, very deadly. It's not a team you want to play in a playoff series. It's not a team that you even want to play on a night in, night out basis, because regardless, you could have 2 star players injured on the Clippers and you're still having to play against 2 star players on the Clippers. That's how deep of a top end rotation that this team has. And as much as I'm skeptical of if it'll work, as much as I'm, not hoping, or not necessarily not hoping, but not believing in this team to win a championship, as, over the past few seasons, they've continued to prove to me that that's not the team that they are. This is by far and away the best chance for the Clippers to win a championship. And if you're Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers, and obviously a super fan as well, this is perfect for you, because if things do go wrong, you're able to reset after the season. If one star leaves, I assume most of them are, you might be able to keep one guy on the team. But it really lets you kind of move on to the future if things don't work. And if things do work, it allows you to next season in your new arena that you're finally building to not be under the Los Angeles Lakers in, this big investment you've made into buying the team, trading for all these players, paying all these players, bringing in coaches, and now building a new arena. It would all pay off for you if you win a championship. So from Ballmer's perspective, I think it is very valuable to know where you are after the season, and right now know where you are as well, because the players on this team aren't worried necessarily about being big trade pieces, because the biggest trade that was being talked about for this team has already happened. So it kind of lets guys, build that chemistry. It's early enough in the season that you can see where you might have flaws come trade deadline if you do need to bring in any additions, and it opens up so much for this team to be a true contender in the Western Conference, which is deeper than ever before. But with all that said, I hope you guys do enjoy. What do you guys think of the James Harden trade? Let me know down below. And who do you guys think will be the next star player to be traded in the NBA? Obviously, a lot of rumors have been swirling, and I've mentioned Zach LaVine quite a bit throughout the video here today, and I think he might be the leading candidate for that. But is there anybody else you guys think might sneakily end up being traded at the deadline or come next offseason? I'd love to know your guys' opinions. And yeah, with all that said, appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you all next time. Peace out, guys.
Keep trying to tell my dogs, man. I work with James Harden at Walmart, bro. This inside gear, you feel me? You gotta do the 2-step back one time. You know what I'm saying?